Women and girls are very much at the heart of our approach to economic development, and no society, I think every colleague will agree with this, no society can truly flourish if half the population is held back. At the UK Africa Investment Summit, I announced further support for our Work and Opportunities for Women programme, which will help at least 100,000 additional women to achieve better paid and more secure work.
Mr. Speaker, the UK has a responsibility for the plastic pollution we see, particularly in developing countries. The UK has a major responsibility for the plastic pollution that we see, particularly in developing countries. So what work is the UK government doing to stop the trade and export of plastic pollution from the UK?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I did set out earlier what we are doing in terms of this particular area, but what I would say to him is that, of course, there is a legitimate export market for plastic waste as secondary raw material. However, we take very firm action against those engaged in the illegal export of contaminated, low-quality and unrecyclable plastic waste.
Gentleman Plechley.
That there are issues with the allocation of British funding to the Kurdistan region. So can my honourable friend join me in paying tribute to the region, who have accommodated over 1 million refugees and displaced people since 2014 and sought out the funding?
I most certainly do join him in paying tribute to the Kurdistan regional government and other governments in the area that are helping in this respect, including Jordan and Lebanon and Turkey. I'm not aware of any delays to the allocation to which he refers, but I'm very happy to look into the matter.
We now come to PMQs. Question 1, Colonel Monaghan.
Happily, Mr. Speaker. Question number.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I will have further such meetings later today.
Colonel Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Monday was Holocaust Memorial Day, when we remember those who suffered under Nazi persecution. During this dark time, Britain stood out as a beacon of hope, and 10,000 Jewish children came here with the Kinder transport. When his government rejected Lord Dubb's amendment on unaccompanied child refugees, Britain's beacon dimmed. Will the Prime Minister now devolve powers over immigration to Holyrood to allow Scotland to be that beacon of hope?
Mr. Speaker, I think she does a disservice to this country's reputation and to its record, because we have not only taken 41,000 children, unaccompanied children, since 2010, but I think this whole country can be very proud of everything that we continue to do to commemorate the Holocaust and what took place then.
Bill Wigan.
I know that my right honourable friend would never put our country at risk. I also know that he was born in America. So what plans does he have to convince the US Secretary of State that the Huawei deal is safe not only for our constituents but also for our allies?
I thank my right honourable friend, and he raises a most important point, which I know is of great concern to members across the House. And I want to assure the House, and indeed the country, that I think it is absolutely vital that people in this country do have access to the best technology available, but that we also do absolutely nothing to imperil our relationship with the United States, to do anything to compromise our critical national security infrastructure, or to do anything to imperil our extremely valuable cooperation with Five Eyes security partners.
Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to send our thoughts to the family and friends of the Royal Marine soldier who sadly died in a training incident earlier this week. And if you'll forgive me, Mr. Speaker, could we take just a minute to pay tribute to Nicholas Parsons, who passed away this week, and thank him for his work in broadcasting. This Friday, the UK will be leaving the European Union. The actions we take over the months and years ahead will shape our future role within the international community for generations to come. Britain's role in the world will face one of its most important tests later this year when COP26 meets in Glasgow to discuss the need for drastic action to tackle the climate emergency. Given the scale of the crisis, does the Prime Minister think that we as a country should be financing billions of pounds on oil and gas projects all around the world?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me first of all say in deference to in memory of Nicholas Parsons, I think we should all avoid hesitation, deviation or repetition in this House, and I can answer very clearly by saying I do think it important that the UK continues to campaign against hydrocarbon emissions of all kinds, as we do, and he will have noticed that we have just decided to ban support for all extraction of coal around the world, and that is a massive step forward by this country.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Speaker, the report from the BBC and Unearthed investigation has revealed that a government agency has helped to finance oil and gas projects which will emit 69 million tonnes of carbon a year, nearly a sixth of the total emissions from this country alone. The effects of climate change have been felt in this country with flooding in Yorkshire and the Midlands and, of course, with the wildfires in Australia. Despite pledging to reach net zero emissions by 2050, on current track the government will only meet the target by 2099. Can we afford to wait another 79 years before we reach net zero in this country?
Mr. Speaker, this government has doubled spending on tackling climate change internationally to £11.6 billion, and I'm not surprised actually, because he's so pessimistic, he's so gloomy. Don't forget, Mr. Speaker, that this country has reduced CO2 emissions already by 42% on 1990 levels, whilst the economy under this Conservative government has grown by 73%. That's our record. We can do both.
Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn
has voted against every proposal to take action on climate change until he became Prime Minister. I hope for the sake of our future he changes his mind before COP26 meets in Glasgow. And speaking of failing to take a global lead on climate change, the US Secretary of State is visiting later today. President Trump's latest Middle East peace plan is not a peace plan. It will annex Palestinian territory, lock in illegal Israeli colonisation, transfer Palestinian citizens of Israel and deny Palestinian people their fundamental rights. When the government meets with the US Secretary of State later today, will he make it clear that the British government will stand for a genuine, internationally backed peace plan rather than this stuff proposed by Trump yesterday?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. This is a problem that has bedevilled the world for decades, and the Middle East, of course, in particular. No peace plan is perfect, but this has the merit of a two-state solution. It is a two-state solution. It would ensure that Jerusalem is both the capital of Israel and of the Palestinian people. And I urge him, rather than being so characteristically negative, to reach out to his friend, my friends, our friends in the Palestinian Authority, to Mahmoud Abbas, for whom I have the highest respect, and urge him for once to engage with this initiative, to get talking rather than to leave a political vacuum.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I have the greatest respect for President Abbas and those in the Palestinian Authority. I've met them many times. And as the Prime... Mr. Speaker, this is actually a very serious issue, and I think the Prime Minister should acknowledge that President Trump's plan will not bring any move towards peace, has no support from any Palestinian anywhere in the world, and maybe this would be a good opportunity for the British government to say frankly and candidly to the US, on this you are wrong. There needs to be a two-state solution with international support. The kind of test for this country for the future has to be how we work to end conflict abroad. The Saudi Arabian-led intervention in Yemen has led to the needless deaths of innocent men, women and children. Yet this government has broken the ban on Saudi arms sales 3 times, while Donald Trump has vetoed a ban on arms exports 3 times. Will the Prime Minister confirm that he will respect his own ban and will, when he meets the US later today, ask them to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia while they continue the bombardment of the people of Yemen?
Prime Minister.
Well, as he knows, the Saudi-led operation in Yemen is supported by the UN, a UN mandate to restore the government of Yemen. And it is absolutely vital. He's completely correct that the crisis in Yemen continues, and it's a tragedy for the people of Yemen. But I think what he should rather be doing is supporting the activity of the British UN negotiator, Martin Griffiths, who is doing a fantastic job in trying to bring the sides together and to get a peaceful solution led by Yemenis.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Of course they're trying to bring about a peace process, but it's not helped when one country supplies arms to Saudi Arabia, which has led to the deaths of 100,000 people in Yemen last year alone. According to Human Rights Watch, Saudi authorities have stepped up their arbitrary arrests, trials and convictions and killing of peaceful dissidents and activists, including a large-scale crackdown against the women's rights movement. When the Prime Minister heads to Riyadh later this year for the G20, would he make it clear that any future trade arrangement with Saudi Arabia will be dependent on an improvement of their human rights laws and their human rights record, particularly in respect of women in that country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it won't have escaped the House's attention. The right honourable gentleman is a supporter and defender of the Iranian regime in Tehran, who have grossly exacerbated the tensions in Yemen by sending missiles to attack the civilian population of Saudi Arabia. And of course we raise human rights in Saudi Arabia. My right honourable Foreign Secretary raised the rights of women in Saudi Arabia only the other day. We will continue to do that, and we will do that ever more vigorously, ever more energetically, as we pursue our policy of a global Britain doing free trade deals around the world, which will give us the leverage to make exactly these points.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I condemn human rights abuses in every country in the world, including Iran, Russia and anywhere else where they are committed. My question was, what is being done to ensure our future trade deals are dependent on good human rights in the countries that we deal with? 9 women are in Saudi prisons at the present time, merely for standing up for equal rights for women. 4 of them have received electric shock treatment during interrogation. Is that the kind of human rights we tolerate? I sincerely hope not. Britain, Mr. Speaker, is at a crossroads. We're leaving the EU and Britain's place in the world is going to change. The question is what direction it takes. The signs are that this government is prepared to sacrifice our country's interests and values for short-term political advantage and a sell-out trade deal with Donald Trump. As Foreign Secretary, he embarrassed this country, and as Prime Minister, he shows every sign of being prepared to sell it off. When will the Prime Minister accept the only chance of a truly internationalist Britain is to work with our global partners to tackle the climate catastrophe, expand trade, fight human rights abuses and promote peace?
Thank God he's going.
Mr. Speaker, the difference between this government and the way it treats international affairs and the Labour Party under the present leadership can be summarised as follows. This, in the right honourable gentleman, is a leader of the Labour Party who has consistently stood up not just for Tehran, but for Vladimir Putin when he poisoned innocent people on the streets of this country. He has said he would scrap the armed services of the United Kingdom. He'd end our nuclear deterrent, and he'd abolish NATO, which has been the bulk of our security for the last 70 years. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that is leading the world in tackling abuses, in sticking up for human rights, in championing the struggle against climate change, and in leading the fight that every single girl in the world should have access to 12 years of quality education. That is what global Britain under this government is delivering. He would isolate this country. He would deprive us of our most crucial allies. We are going to take this country forward, outwards, into the world. And, Mr. Speaker, in case I forgot to mention it before, we are going to deliver on our promises and take us out of the European Union, despite everything that he and all the parties opposite tried to do this Friday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Conservative government has an incredible opportunity with our Prime Minister's vision to deliver change by driving forward the levelling up of parts of the country which have lagged behind London. Will the Prime Minister confirm that beautiful Hastings and Rye will not be overlooked in the process of levelling up, and that the necessary investment will be made in our transport infrastructure, education and health to unleash our bags of talent and potential.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the infrastructure revolution will, of course, penetrate all the way to Hastings and Rye and across the whole country, and in it there will be in addition £100 million for the redevelopment of the Conquest Hospital and Eastbourne District Hospital, which I know will be a benefit to her constituents.
Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland, of course, has been dragged out of the European Union against our will. We hope our European friends will leave a light on for Scotland. Mr. Speaker, during the EU referendum, the Chancellor for the Duchy of Lancaster said that when it comes to immigration, it would be for the people of Scotland to decide. Right. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the Scottish Government published its plans for a Scottish visa, doing just what the Right Honourable Member promised Scotland should be able to do. Before the ink was even dry, these proposals were rejected without consideration. Since the Prime Minister would never reject a proposal before reading it, can he tell the House on what points he disagrees with Model 3? And if it helps, Mr. Speaker, it was outlined on page 20 of the proposal.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm every sympathy with the industries and businesses of Scotland that need to allow workers to come freely to it for the seasonal agricultural worker scheme we have doubled. And that's very, very important. And I thank the lobbying and representations I've had from Conservative colleagues in Scotland on that point. But I think the idea of having a Scottish-only visa, Mr. Speaker, with a border at Berwick and a wall inspection posts, I think this is absolutely fanciful and deranged. And whatever there may be on page 20 of his document, I doubt if he explains who's going to pay for it, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, nobody's suggesting such a thing, and that just confirms the Prime Minister doesn't have a clue. Unlike the Prime Minister, experts backed the Scottish Government's proposals. The Scottish Trade Union Congress support them. The Federation of Small Business support them. The Scottish Council for Development and Industry support them. Even the MAC report, commissioned by his own government, has highlighted additional migration routes as a means of increasing population growth. The Scottish Government's proposals will boost Scotland's population, grow our economy and protect public services. The UK Government's policies threaten to plunge our working-age population into decline. Mr. Speaker, we were told we would have the most powerful devolved parliament in the world. We were told we would be an equal partner in the family of nations. Will the Prime Minister now read the Scottish Government's proposal, listen to the evidence and deliver a tailored migration policy for Scotland?
Mr. Speaker, we will have exactly such a thing. We will have a points-based system that will deliver the immigration that this whole country needs. May I say to him, Mr. Speaker, the way to boost the population of Scotland is not to have a Scottish Government that taxes the population of Scotland to oblivion, that fails to deliver results in their schools. Mr. Speaker, it may interest you to know that the SNP have not had a debate in their Parliament on education for 2 years. What are they debating today? Whether or not to fly the EU flag. They should get on with the day job, Mr. Speaker.
Andrew Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, up in Yorkshire, in your Conservative Brexit heartlands, we are celebrating us leaving the EU on Friday with a big Brexit bash. I wish to congratulate the Prime Minister on achieving us leaving the EU when so many deemed it impossible. Now, does he agree with me that this is an opportunity for a new chapter in our great country, when we will finally control our laws, our borders and our money, and become a truly global trading nation?
Mr. Speaker, I do join her in her celebrations. I'm sorry I can't be there personally, but I wish everybody in Morley and Outwood a very enjoyable big Brexit bash.
Sorry, champion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Sexual exploitation doesn't end when you turn 18. Indeed, it is the main driver of modern slavery and trafficking of women in this country. So will the Prime Minister join other countries around the world by bringing in legislation to end demand, making it illegal to buy sexual consent?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm certainly happy to look at the proposals that she wishes to bring them forward to the House.
Kevin Hollerley.
Thank you, Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree we need to increase capacity in our railways in and between the North, the Midlands, the South and Scotland? And unless we want decades of disruption, the only way to do this is through the Midlands Engine Rail, Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell my honourable friend that we are not only building the Northern Powerhouse Rail and investing in the Midlands Rail Hub, but as he knows, we are looking into whether and how to proceed with HS2, and the House can expect an announcement very shortly.
Angela Crawley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, this Prime Minister has shown no respect for Scotland. In fact, so will he listen to the Scottish food and drink sector, who currently employ 40,000 EU nationals? Now we have 46,000 roles needing filled by 2030. Mr. Speaker, the figures are clear. Immigration is an urgent priority for Scotland. So when will this Prime Minister accept that Scotland must have the power to tailor its own immigration policy and ensure that we have the powers to do so?
Mr. Speaker, I have the utmost and highest respect for Scotland, for people of Scotland. I have less respect, I must say, for the SNP government of Scotland, which is currently, because of its failures, is producing less growth than any other part of the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by congratulating the Prime Minister on ensuring that this is the final Prime Minister's questions of our time as a member of the European Union? But I know that he shares my concern about the loss of biodiversity around the world. I have seen at first hand how it is possible to turn a palm oil plantation back into a fast-recovering rainforest full of wildlife. Can I ask him to ensure that whilst we're doing good work in restoring environment around the world already, that we step up through DFID, the work we do to restore biodiversity, and in doing so, help tackle climate change?
Well, my right honourable friend raises an exceptionally important point, and that is why it's vital that we have a direct link between the Chinese COP summit on biodiversity and our COP26 summit on climate change.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister talks of avoiding hesitation, repetition and deviation, but would he agree as well that we should avoid hypocrisy? Because we won't be taken seriously. We won't be taken seriously on climate leadership as long as we are ploughing taxpayers' money into projects overseas that are emitting huge amounts of carbon. It's not just the export finance, it's also the fact that at the Africa summit last week, $2 billion was going to be ploughed into more oil and gas. So would he join me and the Environmental Audit Committee in agreeing that from the end of 2021 there should be no UK money going into fossil fuels overseas? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell her is that we've doubled spending on tackling climate change, 11.6 billion, and no, not another penny will be going into digging out coal, and we will do everything we can to help the rest of the world to achieve the incredible record of the UK government in reducing CO2 emissions. That is our ambition.
Rob Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Sunday is World Wetlands Day, and I have the superb Slimbridge WWT headquarters in my constituency. Will the Prime Minister tell us what the Environment Bill will do for wetlands and wildlife, and will he come and visit our famous flamboyance of flamingos?
Mr. Speaker, I look forward to seeing her famous flamboyant flamingos at the earliest opportunity, but I can tell her that our environment plan does place biodiversity frameworks on a statutory footing. Whether or not that includes flamingos, Mr. Speaker, I don't know, but we are putting...
P&O ferries in Hull are finding Filipino seafarers to work for far below the national minimum wage. They are expected to work 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week for 6 months at a time. And the Prime Minister will remember that the Herald of Free Enterprise disaster, which claimed the lives of 193 passengers and crew, was caused by seafarer fatigue. Will he agree to meet a cross-party group of MPs to discuss this issue and try to put this issue to bed once and for all, and indeed to protect British seafarer jobs?
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman, he's absolutely right to raise this, and I think it is a serious issue. I've been told that the replacement crew's working pattern meets the requirements of international maritime conventions, but plainly there are concerns that we have for all the reasons that he mentions. Perhaps the shortest answer I can give is that I know that my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, will be only too happy to meet him and others concerned.
Andy Carter.
This week in my constituency of Warrington South, the much-anticipated Chapelford Medical Centre opened, improving GP access for residents. Will the Prime Minister confirm that this government's intention is to recruit, train and deploy more doctors so we can increase the number of appointments for people in Warrington and across the UK?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that we will not only deliver more doctors, 6,000 more GPs, though, as I think you may recall, we are also pledged to deliver 40 new hospitals and 50,000 more nurses. This is the party of delivery and decision and democracy, and we get on with the job.
Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that we've been pressing for some time for a pension for innocent victims of violence in Northern Ireland. Can he update the House on the progress made thus far and give an absolute assurance that those in receipt of such a pension are innocent victims and it will not include those perpetrators who were injured by their own actions?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, obviously we have every sympathy for innocent victims of violence in Northern Ireland, and we've been consistently clear that the principle that those who have sustained injuries must have happened through no fault of their own. That principle will be sustained throughout the negotiations.
Much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that the Future Fit programme is a £312 million investment in upgrading and modernising hospital services in Shropshire. Telford Council, a medically illiterate organisation, has managed to prevent these changes over the last 6 years, undermining the 300 local doctors and surgeons who believe it's essential for patient safety. Will the Prime Minister intervene to use his good offices to help us break this deadlock? Otherwise, patient safety will be put at risk at the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital.
I thank my honourable friend for raising that issue, and I can tell him that we are indeed getting on with that job, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, says that he will personally intervene to ensure that that is done.
Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Where the MAC report proposes a reduction in salary thresholds from £30,000 to £25,600, it does not go far enough. Given that around half of the Scottish employees earn less than the proposed threshold, that rises to almost 90% in the vital care sector. Does the Prime Minister agree that protecting Scotland's care sector with a tailored migration system is more important than his ideological obsession of cutting immigration?
Mr. Speaker, I think the House should be clear that we do not wish in any way to deprive any part of the UK of the labour that it needs. But we will, and we have special provisions to ensure that Scotland is properly catered for. And as I say, we've doubled the seasonal agricultural workers scheme. But we will respond in due course to the stipulations of the Migration Advisory Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I know my right honourable friend is very fond of the north east of Scotland, having visited twice in the last year. So will he commit here today to delivering the long-awaited oil and gas sector deal, so we can work with that industry as it transitions to net zero and make Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire not just the oil and gas capital of Europe, but the energy capital of the world?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and not only that, Mr. Speaker, but we can do it in such a way as to continue this country's reduction in hydrocarbon emissions.
Mr. Speaker, the shortage of GPs has reached crisis point, and in his answer to the honourable gentleman, the Prime Minister did nothing to allay the fears and concerns of patients who are waiting weeks to see a GP now. People in training is all very well, but what's he going to do now to make sure patients can access GPs?
Well, she's right to raise the point, but, Mr. Speaker, the number of GPs is already going up, and as I've just told the House, we are recruiting 6,000 more.
Paul Howell.
Yesterday's announcement of the Nexus contract being placed with the Swiss company Stadler instead of Hitachi Rail, who are based in my Sedgefield constituency, is, in my opinion, inappropriate and takes no account of the socio-economic benefit to those of UK-based business. I hope to see a positive decision on HS2 with its potential to reconnect the North with London, and would ask the Prime Minister to ensure that UK-based businesses like Hitachi see that investment in the UK properly recognised in the procurement process.
Yes. Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend has personally raised the issue with me before, and I'm sure that his constituents will congratulate him on sticking up for their interests in the way that he does, and I can tell him that there will be a decision on HS2 very shortly if he can just contain his impatience a little bit longer.
Thompson.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the EU published the Erasmus Plus programme annual report. It showed Edinburgh University as the top UK institution for sending students on the scheme. Incoming higher education EU staff stood at 4,970 across the UK. Educational benefits are clearly endless. Will the Prime Minister now prioritise talks on the UK's continued participation so we don't face any delay in joining the next cycle from 2021?
Mr. Speaker, nothing in withdrawal from the EU stops UK students from being able to pursue their hopes, their dreams around the whole of the European Union, and we will ensure that that is the case.
Alicia Chibbucken.
Mr. Speaker, this week sees the start of the second phase of the Grenfell inquiry. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that our thoughts are with those affected, and what we seek from the inquiry is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth as to what happened?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I think most people would agree that Sir Martin Morbick was pretty unflinching in the first section of his report, and I have no doubt that he will be equally unsparing in the next.
Mike Ainsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, is the BBC a mortal enemy of the Conservative Party or a cherished British institution that will be funded by the licence fee?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can certainly say that it's a cherished British institution and not a mortal enemy of the Conservative Party.
Elliot Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Epsom and St Helier NHS Trust is receiving £500 million thanks to this Conservative government. Will he agree with me that this is excellent news for Carshalton and Wallington patients, and encourage constituents to get involved with the consultation on where the new hospital should go?
And I congratulate my honourable friend for speaking up for Carshalton and Wallington, and also drawing attention to investment in the NHS, which is increasing under this government, and for which we have now legislated, not just this year, not just next year, but for every year of this Parliament.
Mohammed Yazid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I visited Grange Academy Special School in Kempston last week. The recent SIF bid to make desperately needed school improvements was turned down by the government. Will the Prime Minister urgently review the funding formula for both capital and revenue so St schools aren't disadvantaged simply because they have fewer pupils?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable makes an important point, but we are increasing funding for SEND schools by £780 million and ensuring that there are more SEND schools, but I'd be happy to look at the particular case that he raises.
Derek Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Half of the adult population in Cornwall and 40% of children have not seen an NHS dentist in the last year. Will my friend, the Prime Minister, who is a friend of Penzance and Cornwall, meet with me to see how we can resolve this inequality?
I'm very happy to meet my honourable friend any time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware that the international strand of Glasgow's fantastic Celtic Connections Festival has been scaled back by almost 20% this year because of what the director Donald Shaw describes as the hassle and stress of sourcing visas for overseas artists? What is the Prime Minister's message to artists that want to come here and share their talents but are put off by an overcomplicated, extortionate application process that signals they're not welcome?
Mr. Speaker, as he knows, that this government has already instituted new measures to ensure that people of talent who are contributing to this economy can come without let or hindrance. And I'm surprised that the director of the festival that he refers to is encountering any difficulties. If he really has a problem, then may I direct him to my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary.
Dr. Kieran Mullen.
Given the Prime Minister's proven track record in overcoming prevarication, procrastination, dither and delay, will he repeat that success and do as my other honourable friends have asked and get HS2 done? No. To secure jobs across the country and in Crewe and Nantwich.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to reassure all my honourable friends and everybody of whatever persuasion they may be about HS2 across this chamber that there will be an announcement and a decision very shortly.
I hope the Prime Minister has the humility to recognise that not everybody will be celebrating on Friday night. We've been promised that leaving the EU will bring power closer to the people, give us a greater say in our communities. Instead, there are many people who feel that they have so far been ignored and disempowered. Will he demonstrate his willingness to listen to all voices by meeting Plaid Cymru leader Adam Price and myself to discuss how Wales will win the tools to forge a better future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly share her general sentiment that it's time for the whole country to come together. I think that Wales voted to leave the EU from memory, and I think it's time that we regarded this as a beginning. This is curtain up on a fantastic future for our country, and that is the frame of mind, may I respectfully suggest to the Right Honourable Lady and others, in which they should approach it.
Order. I have a short statement to make. As Speaker of the House, this is a short statement by me. As Speaker of the House, I am committed to transparency, but I am mindful that the frank advice must be protected confidentially. To balance these principles, I have written to the Clerk of the House to establish a new procedure modelled on power of accounting officers to seek ministerial direction. The procedure will apply if I take a decision as Speaker which the Clerk of the House considers compromises a substantial breach of the standing orders or a departure from long-established conventions without appropriate authorisation by the House itself. In such a case, the Clerk of the House will be empowered to place a statement of his views in the library, and I will always make the House aware that this has been done. I am placing a copy of my letter in the Clerk of the House in the library, the letter from the Clerk of the House into the library. Just give me, I want to. I want to now take some points of order. Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We mark Holocaust Memorial Day this week, a powerful reminder of where hatred and division can lead. Yet, despite all the warnings, anti-Semitism is on the rise. As co-chairs of the All-Party Group on Anti-Semitism, we've worked hard to ensure that all MPs in this House sign up to the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, and 640 members have. Is there any way to convey the message, Mr. Speaker, that this sends a vital signal that this House will take anti-Semitism seriously, congratulate the Anti-Semitism Trust on this initiative, encourage all MPs who haven't to sign, and reaffirm that each solemn pledge must now convert those words into real action and change?
I think she's carried out what her desire was, and the message has certainly gone out as she realised. Not a point of order, but quite rightly, I'm so pleased it's been raised. Point of order, Jamie Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am sure that all members of this House will share my sorrow in noting the recent death of Lord Maclennan of Rogart, or Bob, as all of us who knew him called him. In due course, others, I'm sure, will refer to his career, his role in forming the SDP, and indeed in forming my own party. But, Mr. Speaker, representing his constituency today, I want to put on record his fantastic 35 years of service to his constituents, regardless of their politics, regardless of their rank. And for that reason, Mr. Speaker, he was very, very dearly loved, the length and breadth of his vast constituency. I'm sure all members will join me in sending our condolences to his widow Helen and his family.
Absolutely. Quite rightly, you have raised a very important matter, the death of the former member who had great confidence of all sides of the House. Right, I now want to come to the first Opposition Day motion on policing and crime. I inform the House that I have selected the amendment in the name of the Prime Minister I now call the Right Honourable Diane Abbott to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is no more emotive issue than crime and punishment. And we have asked for this debate today because these issues matter so much to all of our constituents, and because every government has as its first duty to defend the safety and security of its citizens. Of course, it doesn't mean there'll be no crime. What it means is that every government should make its best endeavours to ensure that safety and security. And that doesn't mean dog whistle rhetoric on law and order. It means genuinely making people safer. Ministers like to trumpet their enthusiasm for stop and search. On this side of the House, we support evidence-based stop and search, but random stop and search can poison police community relations rather than necessarily making anybody safer. But instead of fulfilling its duty, the government has tried to ensure safety and security on the cheap. We on this side of the House have repeatedly warned that cuts have consequences. We were
extremely grateful on that point. Will she agree with me that the public value safer neighbourhood policing almost above everything else? They like to see the police out and about and building good community relations. Does she share my regret that a 5-ward cluster in my constituency, which had 30 police on duty a few years back, recently had as few as 7, and no wonder the public no longer feel that the police are present on our streets?
I would like to thank honourable friend for her intervention. I'm familiar with her part of London, and I do share her regret that the amount of visible policing on the ground has lessened because of government cuts.
I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for giving way, and would she agree with me that violent crime, and in particular knife crime, is now at a record high, including in my Slough constituency, where we've had just 2 fatalities in the recent past? Would she not agree with me that this is as a direct result of the huge cuts, including more than £1 billion to our youth centres and more than £1 billion to our police force? And it's about time that the government stops its austerity that is decimating our communities.
I do agree with my honourable friend. The figures for so many categories of crime, including knife crime, show how right we were to warn of the consequences of austerity in relation to law and order and policing. I have to make some progress. Furthermore, the government decided in the last election that its policing pledge was crucial. Its manifesto uses the word police a couple of dozen times. Not as many times as Brexit, but enough to suggest that this was a major plank of its platform. Well, we will see if they can actually get Brexit done before the end of this year. But there must be doubt as to whether they will be able to get the central pledge to recruit 20,000 extra police done, given the poor start on police funding. In light of their overall policies, I'm even less convinced that we will see a fall in serious violent crime. I have to make some progress. Over the course of this debate, we'll undoubtedly hear from the benches opposite their boasts about how many police officers they're going to recruit. But in their recent announcement about police funding, Home Office ministers claimed this is the biggest funding settlement for a decade. Well, they would know, because they're the people that have been cutting police funding for a decade. It is the party opposite that's been responsible for the levels of funding over the past decade. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, that it is the Tory party and Tory ministers who caused such damage to our police when they took an axe to their numbers. It is widely known that they cut more than 20,000 police officers. So to be boasting that you're putting the numbers up now, when you cut them in the first place, will not sit well with our constituents. But along with the cuts to police numbers, and this is important, so I'd ask the House to listen, they also cut thousands of police community support officers and police civilian support staff, and the effect was devastating. Fewer police community support officers is such a terrible thing because communities rely on the PCSOs to maintain community links and to help with low-level policing. And fewer support staff.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And would she agree that there's a stark contrast here with the policy of the Welsh Labour government in the Senedd, who have actually kept and funded PCSOs in Wales, which made a huge difference in my community, despite the cuts we've seen, and our Welsh Labour police commissioners in Gwent and South Wales, who have made such a difference on an evidence-based policing policy?
My honourable friend, I'd like to thank him for reminding me of the progress that the Labour government in Wales has made on this issue. And fewer support staff means police are actually doing more of their own clerical and admin work. And this isn't pen-pushing, but vital work, for instance, in preparing a case for court. And I'm not aware of any plans by this government to restore either the numbers of PCSOs or admin staff. But I'm very happy to give way to the Minister if he wishes to tell me about that. Police officers will still be burdened with non-police and non-crime fighting work. And this government has created a huge shortfall in funding for the police pension fund. The police deserve decent pensions, all public sector workers do, who've seen their pensions frozen under this government. But the police, I have to make some progress, but the government needs to provide funding for police recruitment and police pensions. Otherwise, the funds for one will come out of the other. I would remind the benches opposite what they actually inherited in 2010. It was police officer strength at a record high and a long-term downward trend in total crime, which had begun in the early 1990s and continued through Labour's years in office. You might say that Labour in office was tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. But the government squandered that legacy. In its most recent publication on crime, the Office for National Statistics states, following a long-term reduction, which I've just referred to, levels of crime have remained broadly stable in recent years. Under the Tories, the downward trend in crime halted and total crime has stopped failing. Overall, well over 10 million crimes were committed in the last 12 months. There was also a 7% rise in offences involving knives, and we all of us in this House know the fear and concern in our communities about knife crime. This level of knife crime is 46% higher than when comparable recording began. This government has presided over the highest level of knife crime on record. And of course, this increase all occurred under Tory or Tory-led governments. As for mayors, their resources come from government. And the Crime Survey of England and Wales states, over the past 5 years, and I hope government ministers will take this point seriously. Over the past 5 years, there's been a rise in the prevalence of sexual assault, with the latest estimates returning to levels similar to those over a decade ago. And sexual assault is a concern for all people and for all communities, and ministers should be ashamed that sexual assault is returning to levels seen over a decade ago. Each of these stats, whether it's knife crime, violent crime or sexual assault, are terrible statistics, and the House should pause and think of the individual victims behind these statistics. Taken together, they are a damning indictment of this government failures. But their record is even worse when it comes to actually apprehending criminals. Of course, how could it be otherwise when they've decimated the police and trashed the funding of our criminal justice system? The Home Office's own data shows that just 1 in 14, I'll repeat that, 1 in 14 crimes leads to charge or summons. While crime has risen, the charge rate for crime has fallen, and the charge rate for rape is just 1.4%. I would invite members, and right honourable members, to stop and think how appalling that statistic is. It is shameful. The benches opposite may claim that some of this is because police are recording crime better now. This is true. But the police are not just there to record and report crime. They're there to help prevent it, detect it, and to bring the perpetrators to justice. I have to make progress. The response of the government now, and I no doubt will hear this from ministers, is to talk tough on crime, talk about draconian measures, and to criminalise law-abiding citizens upholding their rights. So this government threatens to criminalise trade unionists engaged in legitimate strike action. It's also been forced to admit an error in listing campaign organisations like CND and Greenpeace as extremists. Its Discredit to Prevent programme has been politicised because this government and these ministers confuse extremism with those who disagree with it. Research funded by the Home Office says that the Home Secretary's approach to addressing young people in danger of radicalisation is madness, the opposite of what is required to prevent radicalisation. I have to say to the benches opposite, you don't tackle crime by criminalising lawful activity by campaigners like CND. You don't tackle crime with ever longer sentences where inexperienced first-time offenders become hard cases or drug addicts in prison. And you don't tackle crime when you've cut the police so much that you can't catch the criminals in the first place. As everyone knows, it suggests a contempt for the issues I'm talking about. Whether it's violent crime, whether it's violent crime or whether it's rape. Labour's promise in the 2017 election and its pledge to increase the police after years of government cuts had a lot of resonance with the public. I take the current government's pledge as something of a tribute to our work, a tribute to Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party, even in opposition. But we always understood that increasing policing was not enough. As many senior police officers have told me, you cannot arrest your way out of a crime problem. You have to take an integrated approach, more and better policing, addressing crime as a public health issue, drawing in all the public services and resourcing them properly and funding them properly. The government has paid lip service to a public health approach. But so many of the services have had to come together to make the public health method work. Schools, youth services, housing are funded by local authorities. And the government has no intention of funding our local authorities properly.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and I'm really pleased that she's drawing attention to the role that local government can play, because I hope she'll join me in recognising the work that Labour's Prime Commissioner Keith Hunter, that Labour City Council are doing in tackling the problems of city centre crime by creating a crime hub and working with city centre businesses. This is all because we've seen such a huge increase at the same time we've seen the numbers of police officers cut.
Yeah. I'd like to thank my friend for an important intervention. The government has said it will establish violence reduction units, which is another Labour policy. But in its repeated announcement of the same money, it is not committed to long-term funding for violence reduction units. We will be holding them to account on this. We will be holding them to account on all of their pledges to recruit 20,000 additional police, to tackle violent crime, to make our streets safer. Crime. I'm coming to a close. Crime, particularly violent crime, is a tragedy. It's a tragic tragedy for the victims of crime, but it's also traumatic for the mothers and families of the perpetrators of crime. And if honourable members opposite, like myself, had to go and visit the families of young people who have been the victims of crime, they would not be making a joke of this issue. On this side of the House, because we know how seriously our constituents take this issue, we are pledged to hold the government to account on all of their pledges. The government has to live up to what it has promised. The public deserves no less.
The question is, as on the order paper, I call Kit Malthouse to move the government amendment. Kit Malthouse.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the amendment standing in the name of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and others. Mr. Speaker, fighting crime has never been a theoretical or statistical issue for me, as it is for many. Happily, the Office for National Statistics tells us that the likelihood of becoming a victim of crime has fallen significantly in the long term. In 1995, around 4 in 10 adults were estimated to have been a victim of crime, not including fraud or computer misuse. Last year, the comparable figure was just 2 in 10. But as you may recall, Mr. Speaker, I was Deputy Mayor for Policing in London between 2008 and 2012, at a time when we were wrestling with a terrible rise in serious violence across the capital. And I can still remember the devastation on the face of the father of Amro al-Badawi, the 14-year-old who was stabbed to death in Queen's Park in March 2008. I was campaigning for the London Assembly seat at the time, and when I met them, Amro's family brought home the devastation, destruction and the terror that knife crime had brought to London. The then Mayor and now Prime Minister and I made it our personal mission to turn that awful tide. In our first year, 29 young people were killed. By the time I left policing, it had fallen to 8. 8 too many, but on the previous trend, it could easily have been 50. And it's worth perhaps remembering, Mr. Speaker, that all of those terrible events took place when police officer numbers were at a high and the then Labour government was spending borrowed money like water. I learned then what every sensible person knows. Quantity is no substitute for quality in crime fighting. Successful crime fighting requires sustained and committed focus by highly motivated leaders in policing and in politics. That is what a Conservative Mayor brought to City Hall and what this new Conservative government will redouble and bring to the United Kingdom. By all means.
Thank the Minister for giving way. He's been very generous. Could I just, on that point about knife crime and related to, say, drugs, and whilst they may have been successful in London, what is happening is it's being exported to towns around the cities through county drug lines. And we are seeing that in towns like Warwick and Leamington with a death just 2 weeks ago in a multiple stabbing. Does the Minister agree that it's about intelligence on the street, PCSOs on the street and community workers that will actually sort this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he's quite right to raise county lines as an issue. And I will be saying more about that later in my speech. And I too suffer from the county lines phenomenon in my constituency. But there is no silver bullet solution to this particular problem. It does require a 360-degree assault upon these gangs. And as I say, I'll say more about that in a moment. By all means.
He talks about a 360-degree approach, and would he therefore share my deep concern that when I discovered, along with BBC Wales, videos glamorising knife violence involving actually convicted criminals operating in my own constituency, that YouTube refused to take those down and said they were legitimate artistic expression? When they're glamorising knives, carrying of knives and disposal of evidence, as was shown in those videos, does he agree with me that YouTube should be taking those videos down?
Mr. Speaker, at a time when we all owe a duty to our young people to stand shoulder to shoulder in the fight against the violence which disproportionately affects them, I find it hard to imagine what it must be like to be a director of those companies sitting in a room declining to remove this sort of material from their product. No doubt they will, I hope, over time reflect on their duty not just to their shareholders but to wider society. Mr. Speaker, I'll just make a bit of progress. After a decade of sustained and significant falls in crime, we cannot, though, hide from the fact that the landscape is changing and some of the most troubling and violent crimes, including knife offences, are on the rise once again. They are also, as we've just referred to, more visible than ever before. So, given my personal commitment to this issue, I would actually like to thank Her Majesty's loyal opposition for tabling this important debate and giving us the opportunity to outline just some of the urgent actions that we're taking to prevent, detect and fight crime in all its forms. First, commitment from the top. Members will be aware that the Prime Minister will personally chair a new Cabinet Committee on Criminal Justice, leading a drive to bring all departments of state to bear in the struggle against criminality. Second, we know that there must be focus and sustained action on the ground. Attention has quite rightly been drawn to the need to ensure that our police are well funded and that there are more officers on our streets to keep the public safe. On this point at least, we are in total agreement. Police funding is about more than material resources, though. It's about sending a clear message to our police forces that the government supports them in their difficult task, that we know their capabilities, understand the risks they take and that they can rely on us. But merely putting more officers on the street will not in itself reduce crime. Rather, what is needed to tackle crime is a judicious combination of focused interventions, such as the Serious Violence Fund, legislation and preventative measures, alongside that all-important motivated leadership. Last year, Parliament approved a funding settlement which gave police and crime commissioners the opportunity to increase additional public investment in policing by up to £970 million. This included an increase to government grant funding of £161 million, £59 million for counter-terrorism policing, more than £150 million to cover additional pension costs, and £500 million for more local forces from the local council tax precept. This was already the largest yearly increase to police funding in over 5 years, even before the government announced an additional £100 million to tackle serious violence at the spring statement. By all means.
I'm very grateful to the Minister. Does he share my concern that the capital cities of Northern Ireland and Scotland and England have extra funding due to the fact that they're capital cities, but that Cardiff does not receive any extra funding for this very purpose? Would he not address this as the capital city of Wales?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm always happy to speak to police forces about their requirements, and as she will know, particularly with regard to one-off events that may occur in cities like Cardiff, we do have a special fund that can help financially with those particular events. But I'd be more than happy to entertain to meet the Honourable Lady to discuss that. I am aware that Cardiff does shoulder some of the burdens of a capital city, and let's see what we can talk about. There is, though, I would say this, there is, though, a wider objective, which is that beyond the general discussion about funding and process, we do have to concentrate on fighting crime. And while resources do matter in that regard, it's also important that we focus on product. Now, last week, Mr. Speaker, once more, yes.
I thank the Policing Minister for giving way, and I welcome this debate today. It's an area that the Select Committee, obviously in the past Parliament, have done a lot of work, and I'm sorry to miss speaking in this debate because it is my daughter's parents' evening later, which I know the front benches on both sides will understand. But I wanted to particularly ask the Minister about the issue about the drop in the number and the proportion of cases that are reaching charge and summons. Is he as concerned as I am about the drop in justice and the drop in crimes being solved?
Yes, I think we should all be concerned about that particular statistic. And as you will know, the Prime Minister has ordered a Royal Commission into the criminal justice system in some particular crime types, where, for example, on rape, my honourable friend will be leading on a review of rape from end to end to see what more we can do to improve criminal justice. But we must be aware that the best sort of victim is somebody who isn't a victim at all. And where I'd really like to concentrate our effort is on the prevention of crime alongside its prosecution. Now, Mr. Speaker, last week, alongside the funding that I've already mentioned, I announced that we would go even further. From next year, we are giving forces £700 million for the recruitment of the first 6,000 of the 20,000 additional police officers promised in our manifesto. This represents an increase of almost 10% of the core grant funding provided last year. These first 6,000 officers will be shared amongst the 43 territorial forces in England and Wales and will be dedicated to territorial functions. The scale of this campaign, this recruitment campaign, is unprecedented. No previous government has ever attempted such an ambitious police recruitment drive. These new officers will be a visible and reassuring presence on our streets and within our communities. Assuming full take-up of precept flexibility, total police funding will increase by £1.1 billion next year. This is, as the Right Honourable Lady said, the largest funding in the police system for over a decade. And it means that every single force in England and Wales will see a substantial increase in their funding.
Thank the Minister for giving way. On recruitment, since 2010, Southwark has lost more than 400 police officers and PCSOs. So when will the Minister give us them back?
Well, Mr. Speaker, sorry, forgive me, a slip of old memory of old, happily a memory of old times. But there we are. Well, obviously, over the next 3 years, we'll be recruiting 20,000 police officers. Southwark will receive, or the Met will receive, its share of those police officers, alongside whatever the Mayor chooses to do in augmenting the Met's finances. I would say one of the things that we would be very pleased to see is the Mayor of London, whoever that may be after May, stepping in to shoulder much more of the responsibility for the fighting crime in the capital, in a way that, frankly, to be honest with you, we haven't seen in the last few years. And I'm not saying this just because it's time. If you look at the Evening Standard, 2 years ago, almost to the day, I wrote an article saying exactly this, op-ed from the backbenches. There was about time that City Hall stepped forward and took its responsibilities in crime fighting. Yes, please.
You go first.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I'm sorry for making what seems like an obvious point. Does it not think that it's the job of police and crime commissioners to focus on police and crime? And unfortunately, in the West Midlands, our police and crime commissioner has spent most of this year talking about train delays, and that his time could be much better spent talking about and advertising the police recruitment in the West Midlands, which is going to see an extra 366 police officers this year.
Well, I completely agree, as you would expect, with the honourable gentleman. But he has identified a trend that in coming back into policing after an absence of some 6 years, that I've detected, which is that the policing family, in its widest sense, has drifted towards an obsession with process rather than product. For example, in the 6 months that I've been policing minister, I've been invited to conferences on computers and HR, but I've yet to be invited to a conference on crime and how we fight crime. And so we will be holding one in March, where we'll be inviting police and crime commissioners to come and talk about crime-fighting policy in a way that I hope many of the best of them will.
Thank you, Minister. Would you agree with me that it is very important for the Mayor of London in particular to trust local authorities to be able to fight crime and the causes of crime in their own local authorities? My concern is that the money that comes from violence reduction units come with too many conditions. It is local authorities like mine, Westminster City Council, that knows its young people, it knows its estates, it knows its streets. And I would urge the Minister to make sure that the Mayor of London and other police and crime commissioners do trust their local authorities an awful lot more with their funding.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there speaks the voice of experience from Westminster Council. Great to see a former leader and a successor in my council ward in this place. She is quite right, and this was something that we recognised, certainly when I was at City Hall, in our joint engagement meetings where we put every single local authority in London alongside every single borough commander, alongside anybody else, frankly, in the borough who wanted to fight crime, and talked about our common problems and our shared solutions to them, recognising that no one organisation in a geography has a monopoly on wisdom, and that very often local authorities are closer to the problem than the police can be. Now, Mr. Speaker, I must make some progress. The police uplift is, of course, an important part of our strategy to tackle crime, but it is not our only measure. These extra officers will be immediately supported by a raft of new schemes and government legislation designed to make their job easier and safer. The Police Protection and Powers Bill will enshrine in law a new police covenant. This recognises the extraordinary challenges our police face and pledges to recognise the bravery, commitment and sacrifices of serving and former officers. We also plan to consult on doubling the sentence for assaults on police officers and other emergency service workers, and to ensure the punishment fits the crime. Mr. Speaker, now the opposition has quite rightly drawn attention to the rise in knife crime. We set out in our manifesto ideas for a new court order which will give the police new stop and search powers in respect of anybody serving all or part of their sentence for a knife possession offence in the community. This